Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 255, Amplification. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And first of all, we want to wish you a happy new year. Happy 2021. I remember the lead up to 2020 thinking that we were going to have all these 2020 vision cliches where we were going to be talking about the future based on the year 2020. And then everything all went south. It's been a really strange, a really bad year with some silver linings. But I think all of us are probably pretty happy to be turning the page and starting a new year. So we want to start by just wishing everybody who listens to Judaism Unbound a healthy year, a good year, and hopefully a year of renewed activity out in the world, at some point at least later this year. We're continuing our conversations about Jewish philanthropy and looking at how Jewish philanthropy is supporting what's happening now in the Jewish world, how Jewish philanthropists are thinking differently, how they might think differently. And with today's episode, we shift our attention from wealthy individuals or families who put their philanthropic dollars into foundations or other vehicles through which they support Jewish organizations and other kinds of organizations flowing from their Jewish values, to new structures of philanthropy that might allow those funds to be assembled in other ways, and perhaps a new set of Jewish organizations or a new structure of Jewish life really needs a new approach to philanthropy and new vehicles for philanthropy. So today, our guest is Liz Fisher. She is the executive director of an organization called Amplifier, which is dedicated to helping people create and then to supporting what are called giving circles. We're going to talk about that in our conversation, but basically that just means a bunch of people getting together and pooling their money to support what they collectively want to support. Amplifier was originally created by an organization called Natan, which is basically a large giving circle, and now is part of the Jewish Federations of North America, so now it's known as Amplifier at JFNA. Amplifier at JFNA uses this catchphrase to describe what they do: give better, give together. According to their website, Amplifier ignites, strengthens, and informs giving to transform and grow philanthropy inspired by Jewish values and wisdom. We envision a world where everyone has the opportunity to create positive, powerful change through collaborative giving. In addition to being the executive director of Amplifier at JFNA, Liz Fisher is also senior advisor for philanthropy at the Jewish Federations of North America. Before coming to Amplifier, Liz Fisher worked at the organization Repair the World, where she led its expansion, fundraising, communications, and operations. She began her career in grassroots community development with University of Missouri Extension, and she's worked at Next, a division of Birthright Israel Foundation, as well as the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, UJA Federation of New York, and the Jewish Education Project. We're really interested to jump into this conversation about giving circles and to understand what they are and what they might become. So Liz Fisher, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
I wanted to start with a very unsophisticated question because I think I have a pretty unsophisticated understanding of a giving circle. I think I'm going by the English language, and I imagine people sitting in a circle and deciding where to give their money. Could you make that a little richer for us?
Sure. But I would say that it is a pretty accurate description of a giving circle, although, of course, we don't always sit in circles and we don't, always sit together in this virtual world. A giving circle is essentially a group of people who come together, they talk about their values, they research organizations, and then they make a collective grant or series of gifts to an organization or set of organizations. So in many ways, I think your simple understanding of a giving circle is indeed what it is.
I mean, obviously people are free to do whatever they want, but are there a set of rules or understandings of what a giving circle really is about? What makes something a giving circle? Is it that you only give based on the collective vote or how some collective decision gets made? Or what really makes it a giving circle as opposed to a group of friends chatting about where they want to give their money?
So I think there's a few things that make it a giving circle, right? One is that there is a collective piece, right? People come together and they create a pool of their money, and that money then goes together. So I would call, for instance, a group of friends chatting about where they want to give their money. I don't know, maybe something like a philanthropy learning circle, which is also really valuable, right? Or a giving collaborative or something like that. But in a giving circle, there is that collective giving piece. And then the other thing that differentiates a giving circle is choice and agency. So giving circles can be independent. They can be connected with organizations. They live in all sorts of places. But a giving circle is different, say, than a giving society at a nonprofit, where maybe everyone who gives $500 to that nonprofit is part of that giving society. And and it's complicated because often we call those circles, right? We might have Friends of the Philharmonic Circle or something. But what really differentiates a giving circle is the choice in that, right? And so it could be independent and a choice of a number of projects or organizations, or it could be inside an organization and a choice of projects inside that organization. But it's the collective piece and the choice piece.
And can you talk a little bit about the story of Amplifier why did somebody at some point decide this was something that was very important? It was so important to have this phenomenon that they made an organization about it. And when did it start? What was going on before? How's it going?
Amplifier was founded about 5 years ago. And the story of Amplifier actually starts with the story of the Natan Fund, which you might be familiar with. But the Natan Fund is a large giving circle. And the members of the Natan Fund were thinking about the experience that they had, right? Both in building relationships with each other and in really funding innovation. And they started to say to themselves, look, how could other people have this experience, right? And I think they had a moment of thinking about scaling Natan, where they said, do we want to make Natan bigger and bigger and bigger and have, little Natan branch off kinds of things? And instead they said, no, wait a second, like Natan works for us. We're a specific group of people in a, specific place in our lives. But what we really ought to do is take what we've learned from Natan and see if we can help other people build what might work for them. So they started Amplifier essentially as a project at Natan, and then Amplifier spun off and became independent. And then just this year, Amplifier was absorbed into the Jewish Federations of North America.
So I have to jump in because this is a fun moment. Because what you just described, I experienced on the other end. I heard about this thing from a project called Natan that I knew nothing about, but I saw this call in, 2013 or 2014 for, you want to gather a crew and give money to a thing. I'm making it sound much more ridiculous than it is. It was a beautiful thing. And I saw this incredible charge, like gather your friends. Like, it doesn't matter exactly how many of them, it doesn't matter how much you're going to give, make a circle and do some collective decision making and make a gift. I was thrilled by this. And I ended up being part of that first incubator, that first cohort in the Natan incubator before it was called Amplifier. That part that you mentioned, it became Amplifier like as we were doing it or shortly after. I don't even remember the order. It was so fun. And so I want to start with that. I want to start with, there's all of the ideological reasons that we're going to get to around why this is powerful and why amplifying one's personal giving in a group of people is spectacular. It's also fun. It's a way to give money that isn't just me going to a website or writing a check. It's a way that giving actually becomes collaborative and to use the word that we talk about a lot on this show, community building. It's a nice thing. And my experience of it was that I had a bunch of friends that I wasn't that close with, but who were all invested in this project. And all we did was we each put down $100. It was not massive. We forged a real connection with each other. So I'd love to hear from you, like, why do this? Like, why might somebody feel called to start a giving circle?
So I want to answer that question, but first I want to go back to something, Lex, both you and Dan, I've heard you do, which is almost put down in some ways the idea of like, oh, this is simple, or I'm oversimplifying it or something like that. The fact is that the simplicity of gathering a group of people together and thinking about how to make a difference in your community is beautiful, right? And so I think sometimes we think that because things are simple, or particularly in philanthropy, because they're not overly complicated, that could mean that they're not so sophisticated. But I think that there is something great about the fact that this is like a very basic human idea of like, how do we come together? The question of why I started Giving Circle, right? And Lex, your experience with having a good time, right? I think it has to do with most people start Giving Circles either to build connections with other people or to impact a cause that they care about, or both. We've seen a lot of interest this year in Giving Circles. And I think part of the reason is because so many people pick up their phones, like open up the paper or their e-paper, whatever it is, are so frustrated by the state of the world and want to do something. And I think Giving Circles give them an opportunity to really do something to affect the things they care about while having a good time. A colleague of mine often says that this work is only good if you can also find joy in it, right? That we do it to build community and to make a difference.
That word amplifier, it's funny, we're on a podcast. I edit this podcast. I use the amplify function every week of my life. Sometimes Dan or me or a guest becomes too quiet at a certain point, and it's important to amplify them, to literally take the waveform on the screen, make it bigger, and have it so that the sound actually hits you, the listener's ears, in the way that it should, so that you're not dealing with a constant issue where our voices trail off into the distance and then come back. So amplifying is big. I had no potential as a 22-year-old or 23-year-old right after college to make a massive gift to anything I cared about. I did not have that ability. Some people do, but it's a small minority of people. This was a way not to give a mega gift, but to give a meaningful gift. There were 10 of us, and each of us put $100 down, which was a big deal for us at the time. And we gave a $1,000 gift to a small-ish organization for whom that meant a lot. And so I'd love to hear from you what that factor looks like, what that amplification process means. Why is that the name that this project goes by?
Giving through Giving Circle is a way to do more than you can do yourself, right? And that's for sure true financially. I've spoken with people whose financial circumstances have changed for the worse over the last, over the course of this pandemic, right? And who maybe used to be able to give $1,000 and now can give $100, right? And so if they can find 9 friends, they're back up to their 1,000, right? Or someone who can give the 100 and wants to bring their friends. So I think for sure it multiplies the money. The other thing that I would say that's amplified is really the education, right? And the exposure to different organizations, right? So you as an individual donor might say, okay, I care about hunger, right? Something I think a lot of people care about right now. So I'm going to, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to Google, I'm going to ask my friends, I'm going to walk around my neighborhood, and I choose this set of organizations focused on hunger, right? You get 9 other people in the room, and then someone says, Liz, you've picked 9 organizations that are soup kitchens feeding people directly, right? But I just learned about urban farms, right? And those are like empowering people to grow their own food. And maybe that's another way to hit hunger. And someone might say, yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about the fact of, I just learned about food deserts or whatever it is. And I think that the other thing that really gets amplified over this process is learning about the issues and building a real connection to the root causes of the things that you might care about.
So is there kind of a either best practice or these are specific things that Amplifier does where, okay, so you've started your Giving Circle. Now, what do you do? Is there a specific training about best practices, how to run a Giving Circle in a good way? And what is that basically? Is there, if I want to learn more about whatever I've chosen, maybe in this case, hunger. Is that a service that Amplifier provides, or is that a service that other kinds of organizations provide, and Amplifier connects you to them? Or because what you described there was like, my friend found out about food deserts and my friend found out about homeless shelters and whatever. And, a little bit that reminds me of, there was a moment in the Office TV show where Steve Carell is saying that he found something on Wikipedia and you're getting the best information because everybody can contribute to it, and so I'm not sure that I really want to just find out what my friend found out about. I'd love it if there was a way that, like, once you start a giving circle, you have access to this new source of information that might be harder to come by if you're just an individual. Is that how it works?
First of all, I love The Office reference. I have 2 teenagers, both of whom love The Office. And so we watch a lot of Office. We've been watching a lot of pandemic Office in my house. So a number of things happen could happen when you call Amplifier. I think at the simplest level, an individual could say, hey, I want to start a giving circle, and we could send them some materials or show them on our website, and they're kind of off on their way, right? It's great for them. We get sad sometimes because we never hear how it went. Early on in Amplifier's existence, I think there was really a decision to build this in some ways like a movement and really just empower people to do the work, which means that almost everything we have is open access, and there's no membership in Amplifier. There's none of that. It's like, go do it, and we hope you'll tell us how it's going. Or that we have a set of training programs really where we really walk people through this step by step, where over the course of training with Amplifier or with Amplifier and our partners at Philanthropy Together, you almost build like a kind of a digital workbook of, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. Here's all the different steps I'm going to take. And then they go out and do it. The last thing I would say is that we provide a lot of coaching, kind of informal and formal coaching, just if people have questions. Many of the times the hardest thing about starting Giving Circle isn't the technicalities of the Giving Circle, it's the interpersonal pieces of it, right? How do I talk to my friends about money? I'll give you a personal example. A friend of mine and I are talking about doing a pop-up Giving Circle. Pop-up Giving Circle is a tool that Amplifier has that takes all the components of a giving circle and kind of squeezes it into an hour and a half, right? It's a one-time event. You bring people together. And so this friend of mine and I are talking about doing it to support some organizations. I live in Brooklyn. We want to support some local organizations. The piece we're going back and forth on email right now about is how much are we going to ask our friends for, and like, who can afford that and who can't afford that and how awkward is this and whatever. So nothing about the technicalities, just about the social piece of how you do that. What we really want to do is we want to give you as much assistance as you need to start your giving circle. And if that's, you want us by your side holding your hand the whole time, we will. And if it's, you want to just like take the stuff and run with it, that's fine too. The people we find who really often want the most support are either people who are professionals running a giving circle somehow connected with their organization, or people who are dealing with higher dollar amounts. And so they're trying to figure out things like, how do I hold the money? If individuals in the giving circle want individual tax letters from it, how do we deal with that? Like the higher the dollar levels get, there's just a more complicated piece about the money, right? I don't know, Lex, in your giving circle, but sometimes if it's $100 each, either everybody just writes the check themselves to the organization, or maybe, Venmo's their friend who then pays the organization.
I think we did. I think it was one of my earliest Venmo transactions. Right when Venmo was becoming a thing.
Right.
One hat that I'm wearing is the kind of Lex hat where I'm thinking, I have this WhatsApp group with my friends from college that I really love, and we really have a strong connection, but we don't have that much to do together. We see each other at reunions. It seems like a kind of a fun and meaningful thing that maybe I could suggest to them. So, so I can see, and when I think about it that way, I'm thinking like probably a lot of the folks who are listening right now have some version of that where they say, oh, gee, I never thought about a giving circle as a way of building community or building deeper relationships with my friends and family. That sounds very cool. Okay, so that feels like that's one point of view. The other way that I'm thinking about what you're talking about is from the perspective of somebody who's running a small nonprofit organization, where I say, for various reasons, a lot of the big givers in town, it's hard to get money from them. They're either we're too small for them, or their interests are very well developed and in very particular realms of the Jewish world. The whole point of what we're doing is that we're trying to change the paradigm of thinking. And it feels very appealing to think that there's this possibility out there that there are all these kind of little collectives that have more money than a random person, but less money than a huge foundation. And maybe we would be able to pitch what we're doing to that. So I'm wondering on that score, could you give us a little sense of the landscape of what kinds of giving circles are out there, specifically through Amplifier? That there's the Lex and his friends, giving a grand total of $1,000. And then there's Natan, which is giving, I think, probably millions. And like, what is in between? What does that landscape look like? And how do you see them relating to this question of what are they going to fund? Do they tend to fund differently from the way that either individuals or large organizations fund, or is it just kind of a different vehicle for funding, but in similar ways?
So we understand through some research, and I just want to say that one of the things we've already talked about is how grassroots and organic a big piece of this movement is. And so any research is a little bit potentially not capturing everything. But here's what we believe. We believe that over the last 20 years in the United States, there were around 1,600 giving circles with about 150,000 people engaged. And at Amplifier, I'd say we have around 130 giving circles loosely in our network. Those are either giving circles we've helped launch or that we've consulted with, et cetera. The big challenge for us is that we don't always know what those giving circles are giving to and where their money is going. There was an early hypothesis at Amplifier that we could build a kind of a marketplace of giving circles and organizations, and that actually used to live on the Amplifier website, but it wasn't really being utilized in that way. And so we took it off the website, right? I think it was a test to see if we could do it. I talk to leaders of small nonprofits all the time that say to me, like, do you know if there's any giving circles who are interested in what we do? And I'm always sad, not always. Every now and then I do know them, but it's usually pretty coincidental. I don't yet have a good sense of the circles, in part because many giving circles are like the one Lex described, where they meet for a certain amount of time and then they go off and do their thing. And to the second piece about how giving circles tend to give or how they give differently, giving circles tend to give more locally. They tend to take more risks because they don't have quite the intense processes that foundations do. They often give unrestricted, and we always, it's interesting. Earlier I said there is no kind of one model, but there are some things we push pretty hard. And one is for giving circles that are not making huge grants, but in general, they should not overburden organizations, right? And so we are constantly saying, like, just because you have a giving circle where it might be very important to you to learn about the organization, that doesn't mean that you need to make the organization fill out a long grant document for, $1,000 or whatever. So that's what I'd say about how giving circles give differently than maybe individual donors or large foundations.
You mentioned beautifully how in the realm of, say, food justice, there could be some people talking about hunger. There could be some people talking about the urban farms. There could be people talking about systemic questions of food justice. Like, I'll tell you, we had some of those conversations in this giving circle, and they were learning conversations. Absolutely. We all grew and learned. They were also really hard because some people had particular ideologies at play where they really wanted to do work that they could sort of see directly that this is putting food in people's mouths. And other people wanted to do giving that was more about addressing a societal problem than it was directly putting the food in mouths. And that's a hard thing to navigate, especially if you have to all agree at the end of the day. So that's one challenge that we experienced. We were able to navigate it really effectively. But what are other hard elements of these giving circle conversations that might come up. What are the challenges of giving in this way that are different from when you just sort of can give on your own?
One is the challenge that you describe, right, of having to come to some kind of collective decision, right? And giving circles, there's a lot of conversation right now about how to talk to people that you don't agree with, right? One of the interesting things about giving circles is not just about dialogue. In the end, you actually have to make a decision, right?
Yeah.
And that really pushes, right? You can't just say, okay, like we'll agree to disagree, because in the end, you have to come to a decision. I think another challenge is talking about money with your friends. That's just hard, even for people who have some comfort in talking about other uncomfortable things, whether it's race or, sexuality, whatever it is. Money is still a little bit of a forbidden conversation in our culture. So I think that's another challenge in a giving circle.
I mean, there's part of it that just feels like even just being locked into a process that happens at a certain time, and it's not that time is dictated by the fact that if you don't give the money today, it's not going to be tax deductible, it would be an advantage in itself. I'm also thinking in terms of wearing the hat that I wear at this organization. Like if I'm an organizational leader and I think that our organization has a unique take on the topic that we're addressing, whether that's Judaism or hunger or whatever it might be, do you think that it's something that organizations ought to be doing, or do you think it's something, or do you see it something that organizations are doing where they are trying to initiate giving circles within their world of supporters or members to say that it's not so that they themselves can get money, but it's saying, is there a way that we can elevate the area and the perspective in which we're working fundamentally, I'm asking whether we should be trying to get Judaism Unbound listeners to be creating giving circles, not in order to support us, but in order to support the organizations that we interview on Judaism Unbound that are particularly, more adventurous in their Jewish thinking, for example.
For lots of us, a lot of our giving is reactive, right? That's, both in terms of whatever Facebook fundraiser we get invited to, we see a GoFundMe, we walk past in the neighborhood I live in, there are lines for food pantries pretty much every day of the week right now. We walk past something like that. And that's all important giving. I believe that we have to have a really diverse set of ways that we give as individuals and that philanthropy works in the community. But there's also a real imperative for us to become more intentional in our giving, right? And to really think about, okay, what are the causes that I care about? How can I give? Imagine if we all sit down, it's the beginning of the year, and say, okay, like how much might I want to give this year? And in what buckets, right? And I would recommend you always leave a bucket for the spontaneous things, but like, how can I become more intentional in general? And giving circles are not the only way, but they're one way to do that. In terms of organizations and giving circles, there are multiple ways that organizational leaders can use giving circles. One is internally. So if you have an organization where you have lots of projects inside that people might be able to sponsor, give to, you can run a giving circle just for your constituents. And so they could support different parts of your organization, right? A good example of this is there are many JCCs that we're working with that are running giving circles. So you can give to the senior services, you can give to the teen programs, et cetera. Jewish day schools, lots of Jewish day schools are using giving circles, same kind of thing. I think a second way is for organizations, just like you said, Judaism Unbound, that have some set of partners, constituents, things they're trying to get people to see out in the world. They can use giving circles as a way to engage their users, listeners, whatever it might be, about those kinds of things. And then the third thing I would kind of flip back at the both of you is, if an organization really believes in reimagining Judaism, like what's the role of tzedakah in reimagined Judaism, right? And what does that mean? We haven't talked very much about the Jewish values piece of Amplifier, but I think that there are also organizations, congregations, communities who are doing this not to just to support themselves or to support their partners, but because they believe actually that giving is a critical piece of Jewish identity, and they want to explore ways to engage with that Jewish identity.
Love the flipping. Let's dwell on this. Okay, reimagining tzedakah, because I agree with you. We have not yet in this conversation talked about sort of, I don't know, the Jewish angle. Like, that's a weird way to put it. Like, we haven't done the question of like, what's Jewish about Amplifier, which, we sometimes ask in different ways. But yeah, reimagining tzedakah, I'm really interested in that and would love to sort of think with you and with Dan about that. I mean, I think it's almost starting with an imagining and not a reimagining. I think the thickness of tzedakah conversations, in my experience, of righteousness, charity conversations, we say those phrases a lot, but I'm not sure we really are having the deep conversations about how we prioritize giving, how we do this Jewish, like. Maybe you get to Maimonides' famous ladder of giving, where at the top of the ladder, there's anonymous gifts that are seen as particularly commendable and certain ways that are less commendable. But I think that in many ways, we've just sort of stopped at giving is good. Like, tzedakah is good. And I feel like I still am sort of sitting with my Sunday school tzedakah lesson where we made the tzedakah box. And by the way, like, there's other, maybe this is a me thing. Maybe I don't want to project it on everyone, but like, I feel like we have a lot of work to do there. So I guess I would start by saying, first, the imagining needs to be deeply about money and deeply about other non-money things. Because financial giving is vital in the world that we live in. And I sometimes have a pet peeve as a person who takes blood donation very seriously, that we don't talk about the literal kind of giving of our bodies that we can give to save lives. So that would be my starting point, is I would love us to really open that conversation, because I think we sort of fall back on, it's a Jewish value, in quotes, to give. But how and like in what ways? I think there are Jewish texts, a million of them, on those questions. I think that most of us haven't really played around with them. Dan, would you push back on me on that?
No, I would. I think for me, like where I'm sitting with this is I'm thinking like, you said, Liz, it's the beginning of the year. How will we do this better? And I've been always on the kick that the real issue that I struggle with is not giving enough. And one of the reasons why I don't give enough is because we save all the giving till the very end of the year and then are just doing it randomly and it doesn't feel good. And so you kind of stop. And I'm actually kind of sitting here thinking about the combination of a giving circle or some mechanism for allocating the money in a way that would feel better, and also a mechanism for collecting the money, which may also be strengthened by a giving circle. I always used to think about it as a separate bank account where you would direct deposit whatever percent, if you say 10% of your paycheck, and it would just go into this special separate bank account. And then you wouldn't be sitting there at the end of the year writing checks from your checking account and starting to feel like it's getting to be a big number and you're not feeling great about where the money's going because you're just trying to give out this money really fast at the end of December. But actually, you would already know what the amount of money is because you've already deposited it in the account. So I'm just sort of, I'm sitting here thinking like it's not just giving circles. It's not just that, it's a complex of the fact that I think ultimately, Lex, this is what you're saying. Like, I just don't think that we have a very good, other than saying nice things about tzedakah, we don't really have a Jewish way, or certainly most of us don't engage in a Jewish way of giving that tzedakah in a way that actually accomplishes our ideals.
Just the 18s. That's what people know.
Yeah, 18, multiples of 18, yeah. But whereas I'm very moved by the idea that somebody says, the idea of tithing is because none of the money actually belongs to you. It's all luck and grace that you have any of this money. So the idea that you're giving 10% of the money isn't actually a sacrifice for you. I mean, I'm not talking about people who are close to the poverty line, but you shouldn't see it as this generous sacrifice that you're making. You should see the keeping of the other 90% as a benefit that's being accorded to you. And then when you don't give the 10%, you're actually sort of taking what you don't own.
On a technical level, Dan, what you just said about like, gee, I really wish I could take, 10% of my money. And I love that you talked about tithing, because we never talk about tithing in the Jewish community. And why not, right? Like, it's actually comes from Jewish texts, but we never use that language. How do you, I wish I could take that money and put it aside in a separate bank account and then figure it out as the year goes on. Well, that's what a donor advised fund is. And I know that at the moment there is some pushback on donor advised funds and whether the money is held there or not held there. But I'm pro donor advised fund. I think that they create those kinds of philanthropic bank accounts that let people do that kind of work. And more we're seeing them available at sort of no minimums for people to use. So that's like on a technical level, that's what you can do with a donor advised fund. By the way, there are also kinds of collective donor advised funds. That's not exactly what we call them, but that giving circles can use. So everybody can put their money in the pool and then you can give out of it. It's interesting, Lex, that you bring up Maimonides and the whole, kind of anonymity piece that's towards the top. In fundraising, there's this saying that you've probably heard, about giving is like time, talent, and treasure, right? You like give your time, you volunteer, and you give your money. At Amplifier, we work very closely with a network of giving circles, most of Black and African American people, called the Community Investment Network. They talk about time, talent, treasure, and testimony. And in their work, it's really important to tell the story of how we give and what we're giving. And I think about that a lot because I just wonder if it's time to have some more interpretations of the Maimonides ladder. And in a moment in time where nobody knows what you're doing unless you talk about it, are there ways for us to talk about what we're doing that inspires other people, but also are humble and not exploiting other people? And I don't know what that is, but there's like nothing more than I would love for a bunch of really smart Jewish scholars, educators, rabbis to get together and wrap their heads around it. I think that there's lots of really interesting Jewish text around this thing. One I go back to often is a conversation, which is it's a commentary, a set of commentaries, I believe, on Pirkei Avot, which talk about whether it's better to give often. So like every time someone asks you for money, just give lots and lots of times, which I believe is Maimonides' position, right? Just kind of give often. Or whether you should really save up your money and give a big sum right at the end. And there's good reasons for all of those things. Giving often builds a habit of giving, right? Which is what it says in the Talmud. You develop the habit. And saving up feels a little bit harder for you as an individual. So it makes you realize what you're doing and potentially has more impact on the person you're giving to. And so there aren't answers to any of these things, but I think these are questions we ask ourselves all the time in modern life that have roots in Jewish text, which are interesting for us to explore.
I really do sit with the moments when guests are like, yo, let's flip this back to you. So I'm trying to hold what you asked of us, which was like, okay, if Judaism Unbound were to seed, SEED, some giving circles, I mean, maybe this is how I heard what you asked. Like, what would they be? I mean, you talked about like, it could be that they're supporting different parts of Judaism Unbound. Like, my instinct is that they wouldn't be supporting us. I mean, maybe we do something like that, but like, I would be deeply excited at the idea of us convening listeners who do or don't know each other to give to things that, without us defining Judaism Unbound's image, are in our image in some way. And I actually think back to that first incubator I was a part of, where in 2014, not that long ago, our giving circle, this tiny giving circle, we were the digital one. Not digital in the sense that we were supporting digital projects. We were the one that wasn't in one local place with people meeting in a shared room. It was me and two of my coworkers in Jackson, Mississippi, where we lived at the time. And there were 7 other people all over the place. And at the time, like when we pitched it, like when I filled out the form to sign up, I think there was like a "what town are you in?" question. And like I couldn't answer that question. I'm sure now there are lots of giving circles that you work with that are like this. But I think that it would be deeply powerful if we did have a couple I don't know, restrictions where like one of them is it's not sort of an offline in one town space. Like you're specifically connecting with people that you wouldn't see otherwise. I mean, in COVID, this would kind of be every giving circle because we can't gather in the same. But like post COVID, I think even then it would be very powerful if that was the kind of giving circle that we convened. And look, I also have ideas about like the kinds of organizations that we are in a family with, but I'm actually more excited at the process of our listeners asking and answering that question for themselves than I am with me and Dan being like, yes, we love Svara, which we do. We love, all these organizations we've had on the show. Pick from these 40 your 3 favorites. Like, I think it would be a deeply generative thing for us even, not just for the giving circles, for them to look at us and be like, okay, we're being ignited by Judaism Unbound in some abstract sense. Where do we go with it? Do we give to a project that is committed to making the internet a public utility such that people in poorer environments are able to have access to the internet and aren't cut out from it because they can't afford it? To me, that could be an answer to that question. Could it be entirely separate from that? And could it be focusing on Svara and, marginalized Jews having access to sacred Jewish texts like Svara does? Yeah. And there's probably 11 other organizations that I have never thought of as tied to us that people would come to. That's more of a thought for like our listeners than it is directly to you. But like, if you were thinking in our shoes with the skills that you've gained and the expertise you've gained with different giving circles, like given our weird non-geographic format where we're digital, we do have invested listeners, but they mostly do not know each other. How might we go about this?
I think the most important thing for you would be to start with thinking about why, right? Like what are your goals in doing this, right? And is it about engaging your listeners? Is it about funding the kinds of things that you're trying to inspire through your work in the world? Is it about exploring what philanthropy means to Jewish identity? Because I think depending on what you care about, I think it could go in different ways, right? And part of what we've learned at Amplifier over the years, by the way, is that giving circles aren't for everyone. They're not the solution to everything. And about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, we broadened our mission a little bit to make it about igniting, strengthening, and informing giving inspired by Jewish values. And we've created some other kinds of tools. We have this tool called Giving Panorama, which asks people to think about like where they learned about giving, how they think about giving, et cetera, like exploring giving, but actually doesn't even have a giving component in it. If you go down the giving circle route, it is useful to have some kinds of parameters, right? The rules enable creativity. We forget that sometimes, but they do. And so, what could it be for, et cetera? I don't know. I'm happy to, I tell you to call us, right? That's what I should have said. Call me offline and we'll have a conversation about it and we'll figure it out, right? And what might make the most sense and whether you want to do this or not.
Listeners, we're thrilled that you got to sit in on this intro meeting, this intro phone call. That's great. We'll take you up on it.
Yeah, when we have giving circles in a year, you'll know where it came from. But the series is making me think more and more about giving circles and all the reasons that we've been talking about why they're coming about today, but wondering if we can imagine what that might lead to in the future, that we're already seeing some examples of something that started as a giving circle and now it's a foundation or now it's something else.
One of the things that I see happening that I'm really excited about is when I talked about the kind of national landscape of giving circles, many giving circles exist inside networks, like Amplifier is a network. I mentioned the Community Investment Network. They're a network of Black and African American giving circles. There's a network of women's giving circles called Philanos. There's a Latino network, et cetera. There's an Asian American network. One of the things I think is really interesting right now is that we are all in a moment, those networks of really talking with each other. And I think part of what's happening from this is both us really learning new tools and ways of doing the work from each other, but also building relationships between circles. So there were many giving circles of predominantly white people over the summer who said, we want to do a round of racial justice funding. And instead of doing it on their own, they either invested in Black giving circles or partnered with Black giving circles to do that. And some giving circles, of course, are very diverse. But another amplifier incubator, not the one you were at, Lex, but another one of the attendees was a guy named Muhi Khwaja, who is Muslim and went on to fund the Muslim American Community Foundation, which has giving circles, donor advised funds. It has lots of different things. Muhi and I have been talking for a long time, and I think now it's about to happen, about building like some sort of interfaith giving circle or giving circle training or something like that. So to me, that's like one of the interesting ways the movement is expanding, is by these like connections between different circles and different identities.
So I have a question that I've been thinking about throughout this series, and I think you would bring a really interesting lens on it. It's a little bit of a full circle to something that came up right at the beginning when you mentioned Venmo. Venmo, for folks who are not familiar, it came up because you were saying that with small gifts by small giving circles, it might just be that people Venmo to a central person and then they give the gift, something like that. Venmo is a way that people pay each other through an app on their phones. I figure most of our listeners have it, but just in case. I bring it up because from my perspective, I haven't done enough research to call this authoritatively a trend, but it feels anecdotally kind of like a trend where a lot of people my age and younger, or maybe a little, but like millennials, Gen Z, all of this, there's a big push for direct giving to people, to individuals, that often happens with applications like Venmo. And I have felt really called to this in a number of ways. I think it brings up a lot of rich questions, because I think for a long time, there's been a skepticism, a societal skepticism that makes sense on a number of levels around just giving to sort of people, as opposed to organizations that have structures and, pieces in place that make you perhaps more confident that the money that is being given is being allocated responsibly, et cetera. I have felt for a long time some pushback about that. Growing up, I remember walking around. I lived in an area that didn't have that many homeless people on the streets in my suburb. When I was in urban areas, my instinct, I would tend to want to just give money to the person on the street who's standing there. And I had really rich, deep conversations with my family members and with others, some of whom thought that was a great instinct, some of whom did not love that instinct and thought that I might give money differently. I'm curious how you as an organization oriented that. Are there giving circles that have thought about this? Because from my perspective, there's a lot of people in moments of urgent need that have like a now need that, I'm in Facebook groups where there's literally, cash gifts that people make with Venmo that I've given to folks. And that's not necessarily how the nonprofit ecosystem is set up. It's set up to do really important, wonderful things. And look, I work for a nonprofit. I'm not here to say it's bad. How might we orient to that? Are there questions that I haven't considered? Should we, in addition to putting together giving circles directed at nonprofits, be on that, on that tzedakah recalibration front, be incorporating a question of how we might give to individuals themselves?
This question of giving to individuals is very near and dear to my heart, in part because of a personal experience that I had. My sister had a devastating fire where they really lost everything and were only able to put their lives back together through the support that came from a GoFundMe campaign, right? GoFundMe, for people who don't know, is a way where people can contribute directly to a cause similar in the way that you're talking about, Lex. I saw it from the perspective of a recipient, and I think it is an enormously powerful thing that, again, is something that we've had for generations in our community, but now we have technology to enable it to happen, right? In a different kind of a way. The pull of cash assistance that you're feeling is also by the way, part of a larger philanthropic trend, right? There really is a growing sense from many organizations that the best thing to do is to get cash in the hands of people who need it, and they will best understand how to use it, right? That's a kind of, I think my understanding is started as more of an international development trend, but is also happening now in the United States. And I happen to know that philanthropists that are very well known in our community, right? Like, for instance, Stacy Schusterman gave very significantly over the period of the pandemic to some large cash assistance funds, right? I really believe that we need, across the community, we need a robust philanthropic ecosystem, but we also need for ourselves, like, a diverse portfolio of how we give, right? And I think that looks different for different people, but is a combination for many people of giving personally in the way that you're talking about, giving to causes because your friends care about them, of giving to big organizations, small organizations. Like, I think that there's space for all of this. And what's both wonderful and hard is there's no one prescription.
Well, as we get towards the close, I just wanted to say to you that there's one comment or a perspective that you've been giving that's rattling around for me now. Early on in the podcast, I talked a lot about how I felt like going to services didn't really do it for me. And I imagined that I could spend Shabbat in a different way that would be more meaningful, that I would go to a protest. It hadn't really occurred to me that I could make philanthropy a sort of spiritual communal activity. And as I'm leaving this conversation, I'm really thinking about what would it be like to gather communally as a spiritual practice and have the thing that we're doing together rather than praying. I mean, anybody who wants to pray is welcome to, but for me, rather than praying, it would be giving. And that I've always thought of giving as a personal act, but not really as a spiritual practice. And I'm really just, that's rattling around in my mind. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but I just want to share that with you as an outcome of this conversation.
I'm thrilled that's an outcome of this conversation. I think sometimes we think about Jewish practice as, you could be a synagogue Jew, or you could be a learning Jew, or I think actually what's become very popular right now is you can be like a volunteering Jew, right? And of course you can be all of those kinds of things, but I do think there is an opportunity to think about giving as exactly what you're saying, like a spiritual practice of coming together, of demonstrating our values in the world, and really thinking about who we want to be, right? And it is a different kind of legacy, right? Like we are helping build something outside of ourselves. So yeah, I hope that this is the first of many conversations, not just about the Judaism Unbound giving circles we're going to create, but about like what giving means, right? I've been listening to your podcast, and I know you're exploring sort of what's the now and the future of Judaism. And I love the idea that philanthropy and tzedakah is like included in that conversation.
Thank you for your contributions, pun totally intended, to our podcast.
Love it.
Thank you for all that you do, and thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you. It was super fun.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. Before we go and tell you all the different ways to be in touch with us, a big request. We meant what we said before. If you're interested in being part of a Judaism Unbound giving circle, please shoot us a note at lex@judaismunbound.com or dan@judaismunbound.com. We want to start thinking about this. It's not going to be an immediate thing, but, long term, we'd love to have some of these. So please be in touch. The other ways you can be in touch with us besides our emails are at our Facebook page, which is just Judaism Unbound, on Twitter or on Instagram, which those handles are also Judaism Unbound. And you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. The last request we'd like to make is that we deeply appreciate it when you are able to set aside a financial donation for us. And you can do that at judaismunbound.com/donate on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.